Well, joining me now from Baghdad is Ahmed Rushdi. He is a foreign policy advisor for the Speaker of the Iraqi Parliament. In Erbil, we have Dr. Nahro Zagros. He is a political analyst who specializes in Kurdish regional affairs. And completing our panel from Washington, D.C., Douglas Ollivant. He's a retired Army officer and former director for Iraq at the National Security Council during both the Bush and Obama administrations. Thanks all so much for joining us. Let me begin in Baghdad with Ahmed. There are so many challenges facing whomever wins this election, not least the sectarianism that our reporter pointed out there. Will voters put that aside as has been asked of them, or will it play a deciding role in this vote?
Well, let's all agree on one thing, is that this election has a critical outcome on the future of Iraq. In a way or another, we have another dilemma that it's supposed to be happen if the results actually didn't manage well for the sake of Iraq, which is the presence of the Hashid with the other political parties inside the Shiite cabinet, which means that there will be some sort of major disputes between Maliki, Abadi, Al-sadr, Hakim, and the Hashid, or they're going to stand together and put someone as a prime minister from the Hashid, not from Hizb al-Da'wah, which is a new dilemma for Iraq, because at the end, if this thing happen and we have a major dispute between Iran and the U.S., the game will be played very bad on the Iraqi soil. So we have a critical. That's why I said we have a critical point. We will see it all in Saturday. At the same time, I think if everyone become pragmatic and start to think about settlement, or let's say stabilizing Iraq, there will be another scenario, which can be someone like Abadi, the prime minister, and make a coalition with Hakim, with Sadr, and maybe individuals from the Hashid and individuals from Dawlat al-Qanun, from Mr. Maliki bloc. So we have either one of two scenarios, either the escalating scenario or the peaceful scenario. So we don't know actually what's going to happen on Saturday, but at the end, it is a critical moment.
Indeed. Nahro Zagros, I can see you agree with some of what Ahmed had to say. I mean, do you hope as well that pragmatism will overcome the sectarianism in this vote?
I agree with my colleague from Baghdad to a great extent, but let's remember that this election is not going to solve Iraqi problem. Iraqi problem is much larger than what we think, what we perceive outside of Iraq. Iraqi sectarianism is thriving, and also divisions within the Shia groups, within the Sunni, within the Kurds, it's great too. So as well as economic problems, like you said in the beginning, and as well as political problems that we have in Iraq, this election, it's critical, I agree with that, but it's not going to solve the Iraqi election. One of the possible outcomes that is whoever wins, which we assume that the current prime minister might win the majority of votes among other political, in comparison with other political parties. But that doesn't mean he's going to form the government outright. He has to make coalitions with other groups, either with the Shia, with the Sunni, or with the Kurds. But this is going to be very problematic. It's in the past, if it was easy, this coalition between Shia and Kurds in the last two cabinets and governments, this is going to be more problematic for the Kurds to join Mr. Abadi, and also for Abadi to join the Kurds as well, if Abadi wants to make a coalition with other Shia blocs. Because remember, we have a big military wing, the Shia sectarian wing, military wing in the parliament. They are trying to be in the government as well.
Okay. Douglas, then let me just quickly get your take on what you've heard. And I mean, what is the outcome that the U.S. would most like to see in this vote?
I think the outcome the U.S. would like to see is the most likely outcome. The most likely outcome, though it is by no means a sure thing, this is a real election and there could be an unknown result that surprises us. But certainly the consensus view in the smart money is that Haider al-Abadi does well enough in this election to put together the kind of coalition we've been talking about. There are two really interesting things in this election, some things that are new. The first is the emergence of cross-sectarian lists. As we've all agreed, as these groups have shattered, we no longer have Shia unity, we no longer have Kurdish unity, we've never had Sunni unity. That has allowed smaller parties to reach out. So, for example, Abadi's Victory Coalition is running Sunni candidates in Nineveh, led by the former defense minister, Khalid Obeidi. So it is entirely possible, I would say likely, that Mr. Obeidi, that the prime minister, internal to his list, will have 2, 3, perhaps more Sunni candidates from Nineveh, and likewise some Sunni tribal candidates from Anbar. This is going to be something new and different. Now, it's still nascent. It's not going to overtake and totally transform Iraqi politics, but it's an important chipping away at the old system.
Okay.
Similarly, we're seeing the emergence of these new reform parties very quickly, and they're also very important. The NGM, the Quran, the Barham Saleh's party, Iraqis for Change in Baghdad. I don't expect any of these parties to do especially well this time, but again, they are an interesting force that I think will start chipping away at the old politics that we've seen.
Okay, Nahro, let me return to you then. I mean, you pointed out that there are just immense problems that this election won't solve. From on the ground in Iraq, Iraqis need to see a rebuilding of their economy, a rebuilding of infrastructure, job creation, cracking down on corruption, and stopping the return of Daesh as well. Those are major obstacles. But what do Iraqis see as the greatest priority?
I think the greatest priority is security and economy, to improve economy and get rid of corruption that we have in this country. These are the priorities that the voters, the Iraqis, want to see a change. But unfortunately, they don't see any pragmatical steps that Iraqi government has not taken any pragmatical steps to overcome corruption and also improve economy. In terms of security, we all know that Daesh has been defeated in Iraq, but only by military. The ideology still exists in Iraq, and so in this part of the country, in Kurdistan in Iraq, we see that so many refugees from Mosul, they haven't returned to their homes in Mosul because they think it's still dangerous. There is still so many people living in danger in and around Mosul. So it tells you that while the military wing of Daesh has been defeated, but the ideology is there, and therefore we fear that they will pop up in a different shape and form in the near future again.
Okay. If I can ask Ahmed this question, actually, because you were alluding to the divisiveness, really, of foreign influence in Iraq. Now, there is a real problem here from what the Saudi-backed elements see as the threat from Iran's influence, obviously, in Iraq. Sunni Gulf states have pledged, how much? About $30 billion, I believe it is, as part of the international community's efforts to rebuild Iraq. $30 billion is supposed to come from Sunni Gulf states. Is that on the minds of Iraqi voters? Is it at risk if Iranian-backed politicians should win a majority here?
Well, it depends. It depends on the priority. What are the priorities for all the political blocs? I think the most important priority is that we all in one ship. Now, if we got this idea, that means we're going to reach the prime minister, we're going to choose the prime minister as a compromise, can make comparison, or let's say can make so many deals with all those aspects. Now, returning to Douglas, Douglas said that there is a trans-ethnic, cross-ethnic bloc named the Victory, but also there is Al-Wataniya, which is also cross-ethnic, headed by one Shia and two Sunnis, Dr. Salim al-Jubouri, Saleh al-Mutlaq, and Ayad Alawi, who's a Shia, which is also the first time that happened. But at the end, the problem we have is that how we can reach a real political environment that we all can share responsibility, the Kurds, the Sunni, and the Shia, in a way to make, let's say, to keep, or let's say, to make us as a guardian for the unity of Iraq first, and secondly, to try to solve the problems. Now, the major problem that we have, the financial aspect. Now, the financial aspect, it's supposed to be the next prime minister. We're looking forward to open doors, still open doors with the Gulf state, try to convince them is that even if I am from the Hashid, I'm still Iraqi, I'm still want to make a very good relation, strong relations with the Arab countries. Now, yeah, it's difficult, it's not easy, but at the same time, if someone like characterizations of the Abadi will be the prime minister, that he can make so many deals with those countries and also still have a good relations with America, still have a good relation with the US, still have a good relation with the international community. That means he can convince them that what they donate, what they offer, what they're going to offer to Iraq will actually, at the end, rebuild this country.
I'd like to get Douglas's take then on we've heard. We're down to our last few minutes. Douglas, do go ahead.
Yeah, I think I really don't disagree with anything that's being said. I think moving forward, to answer your question on what will the neighbors think, I really think we're just talking about degrees of goodness here. Iraq is going to be reconstructed. Iraq is going to be able to get lines of credits from its neighbors to rebuild its infrastructure, mostly overseen by the World Bank and the fund to keep corruption to a minimum. I think the difference will be just how fast does that move and how much does it accelerate in what would be, a dream team to the United States and the Gulf states, something with Abadi staying as the prime minister, Barham Saleh perhaps as the president, a known factor as the parliamentary speaker. Then the Gulf states would see that as a very good sign. The United States would see that as a good sign. We would bring in the international financial community, the bank, the fund, other banks, and it will move very quickly. But even in the worst case scenario, were Hadi al-Amri and Maliki to band together and create a government that is quite Eastern looking, that reconstruction is still going to happen. It just wouldn't be nearly as fast, and it would take much, much longer for Iraq to recover from the events of the last 4 or 15 years, depending on how you're, or 30 years, depending on how you're counting.
Fair enough. Okay, I'd just like to ask Nahro quickly a final note here. You alluded to some of this in your first answer, really, but do you think what Haider al-Abadi did in quashing, if I can use that word, the Kurdish referendum in the KRG, do you think it's an asset or a liability as far as his re-election is concerned?
Yeah, well, just before then, let's remind ourselves that the view from Washington, the view from the European Union, from my experience talking to them in the last few years in America and also in Europe, that their idea of Iraq is very idealistic, but reality here is different. A united Iraq, in my mind, in my view, it's a vague idea, it's a vague notion. It's not going to happen, it's never been there, never will be. Let's also remind ourselves that this country is held together now by the force of Shia militia, not by the Iraqi army, not by the institutions that we have in this country. The institutions are reflecting a different reality in this country, and the military, Iraqi military, is too weak, and it doesn't represent the whole of Iraq. The only reason that Iraq is together, it's by force, and this force, the actor of this force is the Shia militia. And this Shia militia is supervised, the majority of the blocks within the Shia militia, supervised by Iran, a country that the whole world sees as problematic. So a united Iraq, whether you think Iraq after this election is going to be rebuilt or reconstructed, you will spend so much money for this idea and you will achieve nothing, like before, like all the years that the European community, international bank, and even regional powers are sending money to the Iraqis to rebuild the country. Okay. But in reality, we see nothing. Coming back to the Kurdish referendum, this Kurdish
I'm sorry, Nahro, I'm going to have to interrupt you there because we are completely out of time for this segment. We'll have to leave it with your perspective. I'd like to thank all three of you so much for joining us on The Newsmakers.